As you may have noticed, I do quite a few anime reviews on this channel, and a fair proportion of my audience have never watched anime or don't watch anime. So periodically I'll get people who say, I don't really get what this whole thing's about, why do people like it, or I'd like to watch some, I'm not really sure which one to watch. Like half of what you review you say is bad or mediocre. I don't want to watch something that's like too weird and too Japanesey and is full of like strange references I don't really get. So what are kind of some animes you'd recommend to somebody who either hasn't watched anime before, or maybe when they were younger they watched some Pokemon or Dragon Ball Z or Fighting Foodons or Shaman King or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or some sort of shonen that was on YTV or Fox Kids? And I thought this was a really good idea, because I think it's always neat to check out a different art form, even if you don't become like a weeaboo or a hardcore anime fan or even watch it on a regular basis. It can be kind of nice if it's something in particular that interests you. Like maybe there's a certain genre of something that you're not normally down for, or I guess medium that you're not normally down for, but you're willing to kind of sit through it because you're interested in the premise or the artwork or something. And maybe it's something you want to watch more of in the future. You just kind of need to get your feet wet. So, with that being said, I came up with this list. This is anime for people who don't watch anime or don't very often watch anime. So, the criteria I tried to come up with for this list is and a couple of these are kind of on the line. I tried to pick something that wasn't super Japanesey, that wasn't like completely alien and foreign and weird. It is something that like a Westerner who doesn't have much knowledge of Japanese pop culture or Japanese history could understand. Second, I tried to pick things that have a fairly traditional story structure. That is, it's not like weird stream of consciousness, although some of these have a bit of that. But like when you get into some really abstract anime like Paranoia Agent or something like Serial Experiments Lain, or it's this very weird non-linear thing that's kind of difficult to follow. And you do have Western stuff like that, but I find it more prevalent in a lot of anime. The themes, I'm trying to find stuff that has fairly normalish themes. Something that's kind of recognizable to a Western viewer that doesn't have like that doesn't act the show. It doesn't necessarily have to be like moralistic or get the family values seal of approval, but something that doesn't like actively promote really bad, distasteful values. Something like maybe Rent a Girlfriend. I also went with things that, because I've done this in the past, and I somebody called me on it, and I don't want to do it again, is pick anything that I haven't watched myself fully, and that I can sign off with. Because I've reviewed stuff in the past when I've only watched half of it, and then the second half was garbage, and I just don't want to go down that road again. Also, these are things that I personally like, that I gave at least a 7 to, and this list is not like an entryist thing. This is not like, oh, you have to watch this stuff before you can watch the good stuff. This is a lot of my favorite animes are on this list. A lot of animes that aren't my favorites, but I like are on this list. I would put these up against anything more Japanesey I might like. So we're going to go through the list. There isn't really an obvious order to do this, so I just have it done by IMDb rating with the lowest IMDb ratings at the top and the highest ones at the bottom. I always forget that people can't see me move my hands when I'm doing these videos, but I'm just going to go through them, talk a bit about what the premise of the show is, why you might want to watch it, and why it made this list. So the first one, and after that big intro, this is probably a bad one to start off with, but Girls und Panzer. Now, just hold on for a second. Don't switch the video off. This is a really, really good anime, bizarrely enough. So the premise is a little Japanesey. So basically, there's this international sport called tankery that's played by like high school girls. And it's like this conservative thing that's supposed to teach them to be wives and mothers and teach them femininity or something. But basically, tankery is you have an international competition where groups of different high school girls come and they have tanks and they fight each other and there's a command tank and you either have to knock out all of the tanks or just knock out the command tank to win. And you have the different teams with different themes. So the main team, the Japanese, well, there's two Japanese team and they both use German tanks. There's a Russian team. There's I think both Japanese teams use German tanks. There's an American team where everyone used Shermans. There's a British team where they use like Churchills and Matilda IIs and stuff like that. All the tank models are really nice looking. I don't know how specifically historically accurate it is, but it is nice to see like obscure tanks like the Tiger P or like the different models of the Panzer IV and stuff like that. Aside from that, it's just a really wholesome show about the power of friendship and that sort of thing. There's nothing really objectionable about it. You just kind of have good you have cute girls fighting in tanks. I mean, what could be better? What could be better than that? Next we have Goblin Slayer. Now Goblin Slayer, I'll say because some people here don't really like stuff that's very explicit. This show has like rape and blood and gore, and it's pretty edgy, or as I call it, try hard edge. So Goblin Slayer takes place in basically a D&D game. So everybody in this world, no one has a name. They just go by their race and class. So you have priestess, you have high elf archer, you have lizard man druid, you have spear knight or whatever. The girl who runs the ranch that Goblin Slayer stays at is cowgirl. So everyone just has like a descriptive name, and everyone's just kind of a stereotypical RPG class. And they all kind of get adventures from the guild. Now, Goblin Slayer's family, when he was young, was killed by goblins, and he's become a spurg whose entire existence revolves around slaying goblins. Basically, every single quest put up by the guild that involves goblins, he will take. He always wears armor 24/7 to prevent goblins from sneaking up behind him. He's always coming up with like specific poisons to kill goblins and stuff like that. And goblins are generally kind of considered to be a joke, but they kind of get to be a bigger threat as time goes on. And he eventually kind of gets a team of people around him. And his autism like arouses all the women, so he's like this big group of women who obviously have feelings for him. It's just a really funny show. Goblin Slayer is just such a spurg. Like, they'll just be talking, and he's like, I'm done with talking, let's go kill more goblins. And there's like a part where he's like, are you a goblin? And he just will ask that of random people he meets. So it's just a really funny, really dark, kind of try hard, edgy show. But it's a D&D game, so there's nothing like super Japanesey about it. It's a much more kind of Western dark fantasy. Next up, we got Ghost Hunt. Ghost Hunt is kind of like if you took Ghostbusters and the X-Files and you made it into an anime. It maybe mixed in a bit of a found footage theme to it. So our main character, Mai, accidentally breaks some expensive equipment, which turns out was insured, and Naru, who's the other main character, was just screwing with her and tricked her into working for him. But she winds up working with Kazuya, or she calls him Naru because he's narcissistic and kind of a Chad Spurg. But he leads a kind of a group of paranormal investigators, and it's kind of cool because they have a really wide range of people within it. So Maya eventually turns out has ESP. We have a medium who can get possessed by spirits. We have a guy who uses Chinese, I think, chi magic. We have Masako, who's a... no, sorry, not Masako. We have a Miko. We have a monk who they tend to call Boson, who is a monk and is also like a heavy metal guitarist. We have the best guy, who is John Brown, who is an exceedingly young Catholic priest from Australia. So you kind of have this collection of people with all these different unique spiritual talents, and they just kind of go and they investigate mysteries, hauntings, stuff like that. Once again, I think if you've watched X-Files or Ghostbusters or something like it, it's more of I guess, a drama than a comedy. But there's a lot of just good stuff involved in it. Ghost Hunt is not to be confused with Ghost Stories. Oh, that's something else you might want to check out, particularly the dub if you want something less anime. So I decided to include one of kind of the classic shoujos on this list, kind of one of the big ones that was from the series that emerged in the 90s that became or were tied to video games or card games. You know what I'm talking about, stuff like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon and Digimon and Monster Rancher and Berserk 98 and all that stuff that eventually went on to become kids games. So by far the best of the Digimon series was Digimon Tamers. Now they decided it was a good idea to give the creative team that made Paranoia Agent and Paranoia Agent wasn't made. To give the team that made Serial Experiments Lain responsibility for making a Digimon series. And you know what? They did a hell of a job with it. If I could recommend any kind of Digimon or Pokemon season, I definitely recommend Tamers. So, some things that make Tamers a lot better than most series is I generally think the fewer number of main characters, the better in almost all cases. Unlike other Digimon series where you'll have like 6, 7, 8 Digidestin and then their partners, this series only has 3. We have Takuya, Rika, and Henry, and their partners, and that's it. There's like side characters and supporting characters, but because there's only 3 characters in the show, like 3 main characters, it means everyone gets a lot of character development. They all get separate story arcs. They get they're a lot more of kind of a present character. There's a lot more kind of character development that goes on in this. It's a lot darker and more mature. Like there's character death and stuff like that. There's like an Illuminati organization. How this is kind of different lore-wise than the other Digimon series. So in this world, Digimon exists, but it's a card game that was created by a group of programmers back in college, and kind of the dregs of the simple AI they made turned into the digital world, and you have Digimon from the digital world attempting to invade to kind of reclaim the real world as well. And then we eventually get into stuff like where there's an apocalypse because there's this program called the D Reaper that tries to kind of eliminate everything. It's very much kind of like a coming of age, growing up. The animation I actually think is a lot better in this than most of the other ones. But I think if you want to try something like that, if only for nostalgia's sake, this is definitely the one that I'd try. Now, this is a show I've done a review on in the past, Over the Moon for You. So, trying to kind of explain this simply, our main character, NASA, is a genius. I think he scored the highest of like any student in Japan on the mock exam. And he almost gets killed by Truck-kun. Now, this is not a isekai, despite Truck-kun coming. He gets saved by the most beautiful girl he's ever seen, and he basically begs her to go out with him, and she says that she'll go out with him if he agrees to marry her, which he happily accepts. He spends the next 2 years kind of depressed because his wife who's gone. So then she just kind of shows up out of nowhere in front of his door with marriage papers, and they sign them, and then they're married. So they get married like halfway through the first episode. There's no love triangles. There's no like drama. And it's just about them trying to kind of deal with being a married couple. And neither of them has any real romantic experience. So they don't really know what the boundaries are. And Nasa's always like, would it be inappropriate for me to hold her hand? And stuff like that. It's just a very sweet, unobjectionable, cute show that I think just about anybody who likes romantic comedies would really enjoy. It's a lot more wholesome, I find, than a lot of stuff you get in the West. Next, we get one of several Gainax products on this list. At least there's one other one. Nadia's Secret Blue Water. So Nadia's Secret Blue Water is very much a big sloppy love letter to Victorian era fiction, particularly the works of Jules Verne, but also H. Rider Haggard and all that kind of stuff. Stuff like Atlantis the Lost Empire. I mean, Atlantis the Lost Empire probably was based off of this. So we have our main characters, John and Nadia, and you kind of have a 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea opening where they get knocked overboard or something like that, but they wind up on the Nautilus, which is piloted by Captain Nemo. So in this world, the Atlanteans turn out to be Captain Nemo's an Atlantean, and they turn out to be a people from another planet, and the various submarines they use are actually repurposed spaceships that have like fusion and antimatter reactors in them. And I just think if you're someone who likes that kind of stuff, like Lost World, kind of steampunky things, just anything kind of Victorian era adventure, then I definitely think you'd probably like this one. It's a little older than some of the ones on this list, and I'm not sure if it's aged as well, but I definitely say for a lot of people, Nadia's Secret Blue Water is a good pick. Next, we have the second isekai on this list. It's funny, but Digimon is technically isekai. So is Vision of Escaflowne. It's just they came out prior to Sword Art Online, so they don't have like super long form titles like I was a loser in my previous life and now I'm the ultimate Giga Chad with a harem of QT waifu cat girls in the new world where I'm level 50, something like that. So Vision of Escaflowne was a show I really, really enjoyed as a kid, and rewatching it years later, I thought it was just as good, if not better. So Vision of Escaflowne features a girl named Hitomi who gets transported to a world named Gaia, which is kind of a mirror version of Earth, and they can actually see Earth in the sky, which is called the Mystic Moon. And within this, I think it's called Dungeon Punk or something. It's a mecha, so you have these mechs called Gymeliths, but they're kind of primitive compared to like the mechs in Gundam Wing. So the people are a lot more exposed when they're using them. They have much limited range of motion and just other things that they can do, particularly the ones that most of the allied nations use. So she's brought there by a Von Fanal, and then you also will get a bunch of other characters, Ellen Shazar, and stuff like that. And it's the various free countries struggling against a monolithic entity called the Zybok Empire, which is led by Isaac Newton. Literally Isaac Newton. They call him Isaac. He talks about alchemy. He talks about how he came to the New World. And kind of the big theme of Escaflowne is, it's kind of like Dune in that fate is the big theme, wherein people have visions of the future. Is that actually what's going to come to pass? Is attempting to tell the future something that kind of locks it in? Hitomi has the ability to see the future and the ability to detect certain things. Like, Zybok Gymeliths have a stealth shield, and she can see through that using her abilities. She also reads tarot cards. And basically, like, those around her kind of force her to abuse her powers. And it does kind of mental damage as it goes along. But there's a lot of cloak and dagger where Zybok's trying to take over some of the various free countries, and then they're trying to stay one step ahead of them. It's just a very good dark fantasy that has kind of a lot of interesting artwork, a lot of interesting designs, good characters. The music in it is excellent. There's a lot of Gregorian chant in it, which is something I really enjoy. Overall, I don't know what else to say. Just Vision of Escaflowne is really good if you're looking for some kind of medieval dungeon fantasy thing. So this one here is on the list largely because I believe it's still Fritz's favorite anime, And, well, I thought it was good, but not great. I think it's something that non anime viewers would probably enjoy. So, this is a show that's kind of based on economics. We have our main character, Kraft Lawrence, who is a traveling merchant, and he comes across a wolf deity by the name of Hollow, who's used to be kind of a god who is worshipped to bring harvest, but as people are converting to Christianity and kind of modernizing, they've started to resent her. So she decides to go on a journey with him. And so it's kind of a gradual romance story between the two of them. But a lot of it is just kind of Lawrence trading things, buying weapons, selling weapons, using legal schemes to try to get money. If you just like something that's a bit slower, that maybe focuses a bit more on business or mercantile stuff. Once again, it's because it takes place mostly in kind of a medieval Europe setting. You don't have anything super like weird or Japanesey to it. But I just think it's an enjoyable series for a lot of people. Not for everyone. It's definitely a lot slower than some of the ones on this list, but not bad. I'm sure there's going to be some disagreement about me including this one. I've tried to watch a couple Gundam series over the years, and this is really the only one that I've liked. I loved this show as a kid, and I loved the movie as well. Really, really good music, action scenes, and tone. So, Gundam Wing, I think at its core is about the flow of history. So, the political situation is extremely complicated and keeps changing throughout the series, and everyone switches sides like 5 or 6 different times. But basically, Earth controls the various colonies. In Gundam series, colonies are not normally built on planets, they're like floating habitation complexes. And Earth is kind of brutally controls the colonies with their military awes, and the various colonies are trying to gain independence, and to that end, they build the Gundams, which are made from the rare alloy known as Gundanium, which is virtually indestructible. And they send a series of Gundam pilots to Earth with the goal of causing enough damage or destroying enough, killing enough of the enemy leadership that they give up and allow the colonies independence. And then we will also have like a royalist Illuminati association. We have people with various ideologies like tradition versus progress, or that warfare is a necessary component to make human beings who they are. And without struggle and conflict, it just ends in the end of history and in stasis. That's very much also what I think the movie is about. To kind of give a bit of an idea, the film is called Endless Waltz, and the Endless Waltz is known, they refer to it in the movie as War, Peace, and Revolution, and how those things just, that's kind of the eternal flow of history. Particularly later on towards the end, you start to get more ideas of pacifism, which get a little preachy in the movie, but basically, like, the idea is that they've just been killing people for multiple seasons, and it hasn't really brought about any kind of lasting change. But I really like the characters. I really like the action. I think it's a show that took the audience very seriously. And as a kid, I really enjoyed it. Next, we have Welcome to the N.H.K. Now, this is probably the most Japanesey show on this list. But I think as far as like shows that would appeal to my audience, or shows that people can relate to, this is probably the most. So our main character, Saito, is a NEET or a Hikikimori, who is someone who basically just stays in their room all day. I think he sleeps like 20 hours a day or something like that. He's incapable of interacting with other people. And it's just kind of a massive spurg. He meets a girl named Misaki who makes it her goal to try to rehabilitate Sato and get him to go back out into the world. We also get a bunch of stuff about his backstory, where there is this senpai who was kind of the girl who got away, and she shows up again periodically. He has a next door neighbor who's voiced by Greg Ayres, and like almost all Greg Ayres kids, people, he's kind of a loser incel. Although he's very likable because he's an extremely hard worker, and like a plot point for like half the series is them trying to make a hentai game, which does not go particularly well. Overall, Welcome to the N.H.K. is about dealing with postmodernity, the expectations of society, and largely the inability to kind of face yourself. So NHK is Japanese public broadcasting. It's kind of like the CBC or BBC. And it's called Welcome to the NHK because his senpai back in high school had a theory that the NHK was broadcasting mind control, subliminal stuff that was making people do things. So Sato and kind of a lot of the characters in the series try to blame their personal failings on something external like the NHK or some or other sort of op or just a refusal to take responsibility for themselves. And it kind of is the gradual healing of Sato's soul. Misaki getting better, Senpai getting better, kind of very much a coming of age and becoming mature thing. My only issue is it hits very very close to home as a millennial, Gen X, or a Zoomer, and it is a very emotionally intense show. So just you've been warned going in. Next we have Violet Evergarden, which is a really good show. So this takes place in the aftermath of a fictional version of World War II. World War One. Violet Evergarden was a child who was taken in by the Major and basically trained to be a super soldier. She was an unstoppable killing machine on the battlefield, but at the end of the war, she had both her arms and legs blown off, and now she has adamantine replacements, and she's trying to deal with the aftermath of how does she adapt to civilian life, because she really has no context on how to live. One of the last things the Major said to her before he presumably died was that he loved her and she wants to understand love. So she winds up becoming what's known as an auto memories doll. If you've ever read the Ender books, it's kind of like a speaker for the dead. Basically, at this point in time in history, a large proportion of the population is not literate. So they're hired by people to write letters for them, or documents for them, or stories from them. They're basically professional writers who are very skilled at taking people's conscious and subconscious feelings and putting them into words. And it's kind of a episodic show where she goes every episode or every couple of episodes is her going to a different person and helping them deal with whatever their life event is and providing them with her services. And as the show goes on, we see her more and more kind of get her humanity back and becoming a whole person. The movie is extremely highly reviewed. I didn't like the movie. I think it was one of those cases where I was the only person who didn't like something. But once again, it takes place in largely kind of a Western style area. There's nothing like super weird about it or super kind of Japanesey. So I'd say Violet Evergarden is probably a good place to start. Next we have Spy X Family. I just call it Spy Family because the X is kind of annoying to pronounce. So if you've ever seen Mr. and Mrs. Smith, this is like that, but a lot better. It takes place in a fictional version of the Cold War in, I forget what it's called, but there's like Estonia and Ostadia or whatever. Sorry, I can't remember their names. But basically it takes place in not Germany, which is divided into two halves. Twilight are one of our main characters is a master spy from Wessos or whatever it's called, from the western half, we'll just say West Germany. And he's been asked to infiltrate East Germany and try to, I don't know if his job is to assassinate or spy on the head of the National Unity Party, which is like a far-right nationalist party that's, I think, based off of the Socialist Unionist Party, or whatever it was called in East Germany during the Cold War. So to do that, the only social event that his target Donovan attends is the special meetings of the top students at a school, the nation's top school called Imperial Scholars. And to get invited to those events, you have to have a kid at the school who earns 7 stars and is kind of able to go there. So basically, the convoluted thing is he needs a daughter and a wife to be able to try and infiltrate this school. And so he picks up Anya, who's kind of the breakout character, and I think the most popular character in the series. And she has the ability, she has telepathy, so she's able to read other people's minds. She's also just very cute and and very funny. I really like her English voice actor. It almost kind of makes her sound retarded some of the time. But so you have her, who's a telepath who hides that. You have a Twilight, who's a master spy who hides that, who's kind of a spurg. Then you have the mother of the family, Yor, who is a assassin for the East German government, who's like a super soldier. And so we have just kind of the normal hijinks that you would have where they're all trying to kind of hide their secret identities. Later, we get a dog that can see the future, and they're all just kind of dancing around each other, but over time, they kind of more and more become a functional family. And you've probably seen a bunch of memes about this show because it is super wholesome. It's very funny. It's very stylistic. I don't think there's too many animes that take place during the Cold War. So it's kind of cool to see something from that time period with that kind of fashion and style and music. It kind of reminds me of just a lot of those shows you had during the 70s and 80s. But overall, Spy Family, really good show. Highly recommend it. Once again, nothing too weird. Now, I was actually not going to put NGE on this list, but a lot of people said that they watched it. I was hesitant to put it on this list because it's pretty Japanesey in terms of like just weird shit that happens. I think though a lot of the weird stuff that happens probably has more in common with like Western existentialist science fiction than stuff that's particularly Japanese. I'm not sure if that makes sense. Attempting to explain the plot is very difficult, but essentially there was a cataclysmic event called Second Impact that happened 14 years prior to the series, in which the first of the angels awakened and melted Antarctica and caused global flooding. Now, the angels have come back after 14 years, and they possess something called an AT field or an absolute terror field that makes them more or less immune to conventional weapons, although nuclear weapons will hurt them a little bit. If that's what, or whatever in Two Minds are, it's never really explained. So humanity has built their own super weapon, the Evangelion, which is a humanoid biomech that's also possesses an AT field and is able to combat the angels. And the first kind of half of the show, or I guess there's kind of like 3 or 4 different phases of it. It starts off kind of somber. Then it kind of gets into more of a typical shonen once Asuka shows up. And then I think around episode like 14 or 15, it just starts to go batshit crazy. And it gets darker and darker and more existentialist. And we find out that like everybody in this show has like some dark, evil past. Severe mental health issues. There's all kinds of dark secrets hiding behind every bend. It's very much based on a couple different things. I would say it's based on Judeo Christian symbolism and philosophy. A lot of people say that that's just incidental. I don't think so, because I think, particularly once you get to Enter Evangelion, it's so well integrated into the basic premise of it. Like, I think they did such a good job with Shinji as a Christ metaphor in Enter Evangelion. And if you look at the references are almost all like relevant. Like, all the angels have angel names, and their abilities and appearance are directly related to it. It just, most of the symbolism is like in context, if that makes sense. It doesn't feel like it's something that they just tacked on. So it's kind of a mixture of that. There's a lot of existentialism, the need to find your own a reason to live. In this case, it's more finding a reason to fight. Do you face the cruelties and difficulties of life, or do you run away from it? And then there's a lot of Freudian psychology involved with it. Like the three main characters are the ego, the superego, and the id. And many a title of an episode has some sort of Freudian reference. Still regarded as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, anime series of all time. It is difficult. But there's so many different layers of it, and there's just so much kind of interesting lore and background to it. If you're gonna watch it, I recommend watching this and then watching the Into Evangelion movie. I don't like the rebuild. If you're gonna watch the rebuild, watch it after you've gotten through all of this, so it doesn't kind of taint your image of what it's like. Next, we have Berserk 1998. Now, there's there's three Berserk shows actually. There's this one, the Golden Age arc trilogy of movies, and the newer Berserk 2016 or whatever. It's slightly confusing because Berserk is one of those things, I forget what it's called when you start off like part of the way through the story. But the manga starts off with the Black Swordsman arc, which takes place after the anime series does. The anime series is actually like a flashback from the manga, but it chronologically takes place first. So, I mean, if you were going to make a series for people who hadn't read the manga, then it was a good idea. Also, the narrative of the Golden Age arc just very much, I think, lends itself to this sort of thing. So Berserk is widely considered to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, animes of all time. It's certainly infamous for just how like over the top the ending is. If you ever see a list of like top 10 anime betrayals or top 10 dark endings or whatever, it's that. So Berserk takes place in probably the most grimdark world of grimdark worlds. I don't know. It's a debate whether or not this is more grimdark than Warhammer 40k. I feel like Warhammer 40k has more humor and is more tongue in cheek than Berserk is. But Berserk is like the darkest of dark fantasy. So we have our main character, Guts, who's named Guts because he was born after his mother was dead and came out of her guts. And he grows up the adopted son of a mercenary who sells him, who prostitutes him out to Donovan, which is interesting. But he pimps him out and he teaches him to fight from a really young age. Guts has like more severe PTSD than pretty much anyone I've ever seen in any anime. I guess Casca has worse PTSD than him, but his is pretty fucking bad. So when we start off the series, Guts is pretty much just kind of an automaton. Like he's completely just lost it. He has no maturity. He just kind of kills everything in his path. He's not able to really think things through. He comes across our other main character, Griffith, who leads a group of mercenaries called the Band of the Hawk. Griffith has a dream to have his own kingdom, and is an incredibly good-looking, charismatic, and intelligent figure. He manages to beat Guts in a fight, and then he takes Guts under his wing as his right-hand man. And we see kind of this interesting progression throughout the course of the series, where Guts gradually starts to kind of come out of the insanity that he was raised in, and he gradually becomes a better and better person and a stronger and stronger person, whereas Griffith kind of goes in the opposite direction and starts to become more and more unhinged. And for the most part, it just seems like it's mostly a very dark medieval thing, just with a lot of violence, and there isn't that much supernatural stuff. But it kind of becomes more and more prevalent as we go through the Berserk TV show. Berserk has extremely strong themes of fate. It tends to view people in a very negative light. It tends to be a world in which evil wins more often than not. At the same time, though, and you particularly get this later on with the Skull Knight, there's this conception that there's something very noble and human about struggling against fate, even if it's something that no one can escape. And Berserk is just a very good kind of Shakespearean tragedy, both for Guts and for Griffith. And it does feel very much like a 3-act play that's very well written. The issue, of course, is that it ends with one of the biggest clusterfuck endings probably in anime history. And it was canceled after that, so we never got a follow-up, and it was just left. Yeah. I'm not going to do spoilers. If you haven't watched it before, then I definitely check it out. And we just have 2 more left, or 3 more left on this list. Vinland Saga, probably the newest one on this list, if we don't count the newer seasons of Attack on Titan. So Vinland Saga is like it sounds. It's about the Viking Age in the Northern Seas. It's the time when Svein Forkbeard is the king of Denmark. And our main character, Thorfinn, sneaks on board his father's longship when they're going off to war because he has a dream that he wants to go see Vinland, which Leif Erikson tells him about. And it's not a spoiler because it happens in like the first 2 or 3 episodes, but his father gets killed by a man named Askeladd. And Askeladd sort of takes him in as a very twisted father figure. Thorfinn's entire purpose in life is to kill Askeladd, and he doesn't really care about anything else. And Askeladd uses this as a way to make him into like his personal weapon. And Thorfinn's an extremely good fighter. And basically Askeladd's like, I'll duel you again if you kill this person for me or if you do this thing for me. And as we go through it, really, I think kind of the main character of the first season, more so than Thorfinn, is Askeladd. Because he's a complete and total piece of shit. Like, he's a horrible human being. But he himself will acknowledge that very readily. He thinks he's a horrible person. He thinks that the Vikings are terrible. And ultimately, some of his motivations are non-selfish, which makes him very interesting. And he is... I don't want to go into too much detail, but he's a very interesting character that I think you could do like hours of analysis on and kind of compare him to various historical figures. So I think it's good because it's nothing to do with Japan. It has a lot of anime elements, particularly with how they do fight scenes, but I don't really have an issue with that. So it's interesting. I don't know how historically accurate it is, but we do see like Canute the Great and Svein Forkbeard and kind of some other historical figures. It's a time period I haven't really read much about, so it was cool to see it on the big screen. One of the best reviewed animes of all time. And if you want something a little more recent. Next, we have Attack on Titan. Now, this was the show that I used to hate, and then I rewatched it and I gave it a second chance, and now it's probably tied with Evangelion for my favorite anime, which I know it's kind of like you don't want to pick like the one that everyone thinks is the best to be your favorite anime, but it is just that good. It's like, does Attack on Titan deserve everybody just drooling over it and saying it's the greatest thing of all time? I think it does. To try to explain the plot of Attack on Titan is a little difficult because it changes so much over time. Very roughly, it starts out with what we are told are the last remains of humanity living within a series of walls. The entire outside of the world is controlled by these creatures called Titans that eat and kill people whenever they get a chance to. And in the first episode, one of the walls gets broken, and most of humanity is now starving or having to subsist within the inner walls. And our main character, Eren Yeager, his big thing is he's always about going forward, seeking freedom, always fighting, always struggling. He views most of the people who live inside the walls as sheep, and he despises them because he thinks that like life is about freedom and power and the ability to kind of do what you want. And he just feels that most of the people he's around don't have those same kind of values that he does. And as time goes on, we kind of go from that to some interesting political stuff. particularly once we get to seasons 3 and 4. It becomes very much, I think, one of the best representations of the security dilemma and international relations I've ever seen in a work of fiction, because it's very much about things like mutually assured destruction, the inability of different countries to trust each other, histories of violence in which it just goes one side blames the other and the other side blames the other, and it goes so far back it's not able to be resolved. The idea that rationality alone, as McNamara would say, won't save you, that if everybody acts in their rational self-interest, oftentimes that leads to mutually exclusive goals, and it causes different peoples to fight one another for survival. You also have some stuff about fate, nationalism, just a very well-made show that keeps upping the ante every season. Pretty much every season you go, how are they going to top last season? And they do. It's interesting because it's a show that started out good, got great, and then got amazing. I think it's pretty consistently gotten better as time's gone on. And I'm really excited to see the final season, part 3. This time it's actually the final season. Unless it's not going to be the final season and they're going to do a movie, which I hope they do a movie. But it is what it is. And now we're going to end on a kind of an anticlimax, as I think this show is good, but it's but far from my favorite. Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. This is something that's got a very high reviews from pretty much everyone. A lot of people regard this as like the greatest anime of all time. It's pretty good. I think it's especially good for someone who wants something less Japanesey with kind of a more traditional story structure. It's the tale of two brothers, Ed and Elric, who are both alchemists. In this world, alchemy is this kind of magic where they can transmute things into similar things. So, like if there was a car or something, using alchemy, you could transmit it and transmute it into its base materials. I think you can sometimes turn one substance into another substance. I think there's like a law that punishes alchemists by death if they try to turn things into gold. Most alchemists work for the state of I forget, Armistead, whatever. It's like this German fascist country that's run by the Fuhrer, that's exceedingly militaristic and expansionistic. And most of the alchemists work for that as kind of shock troopers and elite soldiers. And at the beginning of the series, Ed and Al attempt to bring back their mother using alchemy. Al winds up having basically his soul separated from his body, and he gets bound to a suit of armor. And Ed loses his his right hand and his left leg. And a lot of the show is them trying to figure out a way to get Al his body back. But then there's all this other stuff. There's like these plans to destroy the world. So you have a lot of themes like immortality, kind of some existentialist stuff. Just overall, a really solid show. Well, it's not my favorite, and I should probably actually lower this to an 8. It's definitely a good, solid show, and it's one I probably recommend. It's one I probably recommend more to someone else than to myself. Maybe it's just been a while since I've kind of watched it, but overall, good show. So now that you've been here for almost 50 minutes, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope maybe you check one or more of these out. Let me know what you think about them, particularly if you're someone who hasn't watched anime before or hasn't seen very much of it. This was a long time in the making. So God bless everybody. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you all real soon.